Welcome to ClueCon Weekly. Join us every Wednesday to learn about the latest cutting-edge developments in the real-time communications industry. ClueCon Weekly is brought to you by FreeSwitch Solutions. Get support and professional services directly from the creators of the FreeSwitch open source project, solving your issues in the most efficient, stable, and scalable way possible. Get the FreeSwitch advantage. Visit freeswitch.com. Also brought to you by ClueCon, the premier technology conference for developers by developers. Join us every summer in Chicago. ClueCon kicks off on Monday with our annual hackathon, The Coder Games, followed by 3 days of technology-rich presentations discussing telecom, WebRTC, and IoT from developers around the world. To learn more, visit ClueCon.com or call 877-74-CLUE.
And welcome to ClueCon Weekly. Today is August 29th, 2018. And this week we're going to be joined by Daniel from the Kamailio project. If you guys aren't familiar with Daniel, he's been around VoIP for many, many years, and actually goes back even to like OpenServe, probably even Serve. So he's been around, got a lot of knowledge in the area, and he's going to be talking about what they've been working on in Kamailio lately, so you guys stand by for that. Before we get there, let's jump over to Josh for the news. Josh, how are you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing quite all right, Ken. Good afternoon to the community there. Thank you for joining us here on ClueCon Weekly. Bear in mind that if you do have any questions that you'd like to ask our guests this week, you can put those comments or questions into the YouTube, into the HIP chat, or the IRC channels, and we will try to answer your questions during the call here. And so FreeSwitch is heading to AstraCon this year. You can check out Anthony Minisali's open source talk on Wednesday, October 10th at 11:15 a.m. And you can also visit our booth, talk to the team, and get cool swag in the expo hall there. And our very own Evan McGee will be speaking at AstraCon himself. You can check out his talk, Running with Droplets, the cost of cloud RTC, and that will be on October 9th at 10 a.m. And also, he will be giving another speech, the real-time machine learning, on October 11th at 10 a.m. And FreeSwitch Solutions is now offering live virtual training. You can learn the basic FreeSwitch operations from the comfort of your own home or office. Our next 8-hour training is scheduled for September 13th, so get an email sent out to training@freeswitch.com for more information there. And just a reminder, our ClueCon videos are released. If you missed ClueCon this year, you can check out our YouTube channel. We have all of the videos of all the speakers and roundtables. And if you enjoy these, you can join us next year in Chicago on August 5th through the 8th. We are also open for ClueCon 2019 sponsors. You can get in early, take advantage of the sponsor perks. If you're interested, send an email to marketing@cluecon.com. And as usual, be sure to like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and sign up for our mailing list to get these and other fantastic news and announcements. Thanks for watching. Back to you, Ken.
All right. Thank you, Josh. So we're going to have a little special guest here for ClueCon Weekly this week. We're going to have Mike Jarris answering a question for us. Mike, how are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing great.
So this week, I think our question comes from the mailing list. And Darshan asked, is there any REST API support provided in FreeSwitch?
All right, great question. So, bit of a long-winded answer. FreeSwitch has dozens and dozens of different ways you can control it, from embedded scripting languages to our event socket language protocol, and then writing modules inside and outside of FreeSwitch. So, as far as RESTful support, the earliest support that was similar to that would be in our mod.xml RPC module. And that isn't quite REST, but it does allow you to run API commands, the regular FreeSwitch API commands you can run at the console or over ESL. from a web interface. It uses XML RPC or sometimes just an HTTP-like interface, and that is available. There's some limited support for different types of return types and things like that, but it's not robust. And then a couple years ago, 7do added some additional functionality on top of Modverto, since Modverto has a basic web server built in. He added a way that you can build your own RESTful commands on top of Modverto. And if you go to Confluence and search for RESTful Verto, there's a doc about that. But basically, you can use the basic web server, create a base HTML page, route a sub directory off of that to a Lua script or multiple Lua scripts, and handle the individual REST requests in Lua like that. To do that, you use in the config the rewrite rules, and all of that info is on the RESTful Verto Confluence page. We've never really tried to create a more robust solution as far as full control over that in the open source, but we have recently started working on a publicly available cloud service which solves this exact problem. So probably the best solution for the most robust APIs is to check out our new offering, SignalWire Cloud, and you can check that out at signalwire.com. I think that covers it.
Very much, Mike. So now we're to Mr. Daniel from Kamailio. Daniel, how are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing fine, Ken. Thanks for having me again on this session. And yeah, ready for the session. If some people have anything for the start, otherwise the plan would be to go through some of the latest news on Kamailio project, what we added lately, eventually discuss about the near future, the upcoming release. And I'm open to answer questions, discuss about Kamailio and Free Switch together if people in audience have questions or topics to discuss. I'm quite flexible for the last part of the session.
So, quick question for you. So, for people that don't know who you are, exactly who are you? I know you're one of the co-founders of the Kamailio project, but your experience goes well beyond that also, right?
Yeah. So you mentioned at the beginning that all these previous names, and yes, I'm from the Asipto router project. So I joined a few months after the project was actually started inside the Fraunhofer Research Institute here in Berlin. They started like autumn 2001, and I joined in January 2002. And the project was actually made open source in September 2002. So that was SCR, the short name, Asipto router, back in 2002. Later, we created what was known as OpenSCR in 2005 because the license on the Asipto router was acquired by a US company from the institute, and it was not clear what's going to happen with the open source side of the project. And we ended up in another issue in 2008 with another US company on a trademark challenge. They claimed that OpenSCR infringed a trademark they had registered, and we decided to rename instead of challenging in court and so on. So practically, I'm with the same project but different names since January 2002. And yes, currently leading the Kamailio SIP server project. So that that would be the history along the project. Otherwise, from background point of view, I'm like a computer science engineer, so more into programming, network communication rather than telecom side, just to clarify.
Right, cool. So yeah, I want to say thanks for all the Kamailio users out there. Thanks to you and all the contributions that you've made over the years, because you've done a lot of work on that, and I think we want to talk about some of those things. And you want to show off some of those things that you've been working on lately, and get onto that. So what I'm going to do is I think we've got a screen share for you here, and I'm going to go ahead and let you grab that and kind of take over here.
Yep. Okay, so I prepared some slides that I extracted from the last presentation I did to highlight what we have in Kamailio, what we have done in the last 1 year and a half. Quite a lot of new modules that were done in the last 2 years, 1 year and a half actually. That shows the effort we put in the project as a community, because right now it's a community-oriented project. The research institute I mentioned before is still involved in the way of organizing our events like Kamailio or conference, but actually is not leading or managing the project in any other way. And it's a group of companies that contribute based on their needs and area of interest. So we have work with like diameter extension and IMS, voice over LTE, which is somehow hot topic in the spectrum of 4G and the 5G networks. And probably we have, I guess, the most complete open source, or better said, the most rich implementation in open source from IMS point of view, because I'm not sure if it's complete, so I try to avoid that saying it's a complete implementation on anything. So we know cPan can have a lot of extensions, so better don't go in such conclusions. Then my work, or most of my work lately, was in making Kamailio routing logic accessible to a wider range of developers, and I will actually have couple of more slides on it, because it's relevant work we have done lately. We had our scripting language brewed in-house, written from scratch, which was somehow delaying, not to say preventing, newcomers into the Kamailio usage, because they had to learn a new language from scratch. Okay, there were some similarities with other scripting languages, but still different evaluation of the return code, the different syntax, routing blocks, and so on. So that was my work on allowing the SIP routing logic to be written in other scripting language, the ones that are well known out there, like Lua, Python, JavaScript, and also Ruby, and a tiny scripting language known as Squirrel, somehow similar to Lua. Along with another demanded feature, which was allowing to reload the scripting language without restarting Kamailio. So all these new scripting languages, or the support for scripting languages like such as Lua and Python and so on, came with this feature. The old one, the native scripting language, is still without reload, because that's optimized for running at startup. We do a lot of like pre-compilation or compilation in memory of different parts of the configuration file, like parameters, regular expression compilation, and so on, and then we refer in private share memory, and checking if we need to reload will require, and doing the reload will require recompilation, so it will be a lot of work and probably will not have the same kind of performance. Other kind of extensions that were added in the way of like scalability, distribution, support for some of the message queues out there, like RabbitMQ, NSQ. Quite some work with JSON, because it got kind of a standard of object serialization. So we have like pushing counting records on JSON format, or exchanging presence information in JSON format. Backend with Redis became also very used in our project. So we have alternative connector for our database backend. So you could replace MySQL or Postgres with Redis. And there are some dedicated connectors for topology stripping. It's optimized for this back-to-back like topology hiding, and that relies on a Redis cluster to pass headers inside the cluster of Kamailio. So this would be a short summary of the last extensions. I'm gonna focus a bit more on this Chemi framework, or the scripting languages that are available now for writing the SIP routing logic, or for the new, for the people that are new to Kamailio. Kamailio is at the foundation SIP packet router. So you get the invite, you get the buy, and you'll have to decide based on a configuration file scripting block. In our native will be these routing blocks, but in these scripting languages, you practically write some functions. You get the access to an extensive API on like accessing the headers and manipulating these headers, like changing the values, removing, adding headers. Then transport layer for SIP, sending out in stateless, stateful mode, tracking active calls. So practically what it's available in the native scripting language should be now available on this other languages like Lua, Python. I would call it around 90%, because the IMS extension are not yet extended in that direction. But typically with IMS, you have everything in a configuration file like XML. It's a bit more static from that point of view. But we will get it there. Is just the time didn't allow. We have over 250 extension right now, and we want to do that at once. So we need a longer available time frame. Just to have a more structural idea about what actually happened here. So with Kamailio, we have two parts of the configuration file. One would be like passive scope, is the one that is used during the initialization, like what are the sockets to listen in, IP addresses, ports, and so on. How many SIP workers, processes to start, debug level, and so on. So that's interpreted at startup, and then we have the active part of the config file would be this scripting blocks, request route, failure route, and so on. So with this Chemi framework, the passive part of the config file stays the same. Only the active one, you can write it now in the scripting languages I mentioned. Again, this Lua, JavaScript, Python, and so on. And again, one of the demanded features in the past, reloading that routing logic is possible with all these additional scripting languages. To have an idea on like a comparison between the old scripting language and the new one, practically in the current slide on the bottom right corner, you'll have this route block in the native scripting language. This route SIP out, where we check if URI is myself, if yes, we will return in the previous route block. Otherwise, we add a header, append HF. and we send out with the subroute the route relay, and then we exit. So this would be from the default Kamailio configuration file, the part that is sending the SIP traffic to foreign domains. So we filter here, it is for one of my domains, because Kamailio can serve a couple of domains, like asipto.com, kamailio.org could be served by the same Kamailio. Here it would be like for an external SIP server, like freeswitch.org or whatever, we just send it there. So we test if the target URI is local one. So as you could see, it's a small route block. I just put it here because it's easier to compare with what would be the same, but written in a different scripting language. And this would be Lua, the slide with Lua. In the same bottom right corner, you have the equivalent Lua function. This time we'll have to rely on a function, so we export to Lua this KSR module with the function is myself, because we wanted to have the same kind of API to all these Python Lua languages. So we try to export function instead of defining new variables automatically inside the function, these languages, these interpreters. So KSR is myself would be the equivalent of URI is myself, and then we use it with the request URI. And if it's true that it's for our domains, then we exit. And then if it's not, we append the header, the same submodule KSR HDR append HF. So it's quite similar with the previous one, and we send out through a subroute, another function KSR route relay, which would be a wrapper around T relay from the TM module for those that are more familiar with Kamailio. And then we exit the route in here. So we try to have like one-to-one mapping between function available in Kamailio configuration file and function made available in these new scripting languages. And another example would be with the Python. Of course, it's another way of defining function for each these scripting languages. Now with Python, it's define KSR route SIP out, more or less the same KSR is myself for testing the target, and then adding the header and sending out to a wrapper function around the T relay from the TM module. The benefits, besides this reload that I mentioned a couple of times, it's getting access to a variety of resources. Very important is the documentation. All these scripting languages, especially Lua, Python, have extensive documentation there, and even more, they have extensive list of modules and libraries available. So you may need to connect to whatever backend, and we may not have a connector for it. For sure, Python has it, like kind of connecting to CouchDB or something else, just as an example for doing Kamailio SIP routing logic. Then also from the human resources point of view, there are more developers already familiar with these scripting languages. So that's also a plus. I had here slides for Lua and Python because this seems to be the most popular in our community. But again, you can have Ruby, JavaScript. For JavaScript, to have a mention, because some people ask the question, is the JavaScript as a programming language is not something that people expect to be like a Node.js. So it's the structure of how you define the functions and the core operation with numbers and strings. These are the benefits I would highlight for now for this scripting languages. Another question that popped up quite often was in terms of performances. I can say that Lua is in the same level with the native scripting languages, because Lua it's a tiny C-based compiler, and we do a one-to-one mapping between the pointers in the C code and the exports to Lua. What's extra is the lookup in the Lua internal hash table for the function, but it's known to be very fast. And actually, for our own native scripting language, we have to do a lookup in our execution tree. So it will be some operation to figure out what needs to be executed at that moment in any of the situation. For the Python or the Python, because Python is also quite popular lately between the members of our community, I have to say that it's slightly slower because I'm not the original developer of Python module, and we added lately also the Python 3 because the API changed between Python 2 and Python 3. But the latency appears to be from the design of the module, which creates for each new C message a dynamic Python object. In Lua, we practically export as a static module, so it's export once at startup and that's it. With Python, for each C per message, it's created Python object, and that adds some delay. Of course, Python is also known to be slightly slower than Lua per se. However, there were a lot of improvements on performances, so I would not make that as a big drawback. On the other hand, don't take it as Python is slow here, because in my test you could handle like 2000 registration per second in a virtual machine without any issue, with only 2 CPUs. With Python, so the penalty is like 1/3 compared with Lua and native. So if you get like 3000 message processed per second with native on and Lua, expect 2000, so 1/3 less with Python. On the other hand, of course, Python has way more extension than any other language, so you can find anything and you can code it easily in this Python. To move forward, other relevant extensions that or features that we added lately and worth highlighting here would be this transparent proxy capability, which can be also used to implement Anycast. So Anycast SIP routing with Kamailio. Practically behind, we had some function available for a long time. We just made some helper function available to make it easier to deal with a situation when you have multiple sockets. So before you could do it with Kamailio listening on a single Anycast address, but now you can do it with how many you need. You have full flexibility to set incoming socket. You have the flexibility to set source address and this kind of attributes, metadata associated with a SIP message. So if you receive it in one, if you receive the invite, let's say, I'll call it initialized on one Kamailio server, and then you forward it to the target device, based on the Anycast and the queries at the best IP route, the SIP response could end up on another Kamailio from the far, and that Kamailio can easily pass it to the other Kamailio that received the invite for processing properly the SIP transaction and so on. Even another Kamailio received a response by propagating information about the source IP and so on. the other Kamailio can create the environment as it was received by itself. And then practically there is no problem to have the usual functionality as with a single instance. This would be the use case that is quite common out there, Anycast, but could be used for doing scalability on local instances or local networks as well, because again, you can receive on a socket and then you can pass the processing to another Kamailio or another Kamailio process of the same instance, and that one will recover the entire environment as would have been received from the original source. So not traversal and everything, it's handled properly. There is an example, some pieces of examples here. I'm not going to explain them. There is a full configuration file. Hopefully it's visible. It's on our public Kamailio GitHub repository in the MISC example. So it would be like a starting example for doing Anycast with Kamailios, and that's the best way to start. Processing of non-SIP traffic, got also some extension lately. You may need to do different protocol handling. So one example here will be these HEP3 packets, which are for Homer SIP capture, but there are people giving example as you can pass binary data, like you can compress SIP traffic in one node, send it over poor internet connection, and the other one you decompress it, like say gzip or other compressing algorithm, and then with Kamailio you can handle and do SIP routing as usual. So you can act as a SIP capture HEP3 packet proxy, or you can act as pretty much any kind of protocol you want. You just have to register for this network message event route, and then you get what's not SIP as a buffer, and it's up to you to reinject it back in the SIP processing if you expand it to SIP or to something else. The summary, probably I spoke at the beginning, but for having it written and for people that want to read later, I summarize it also in more words than just name of the modules. More links I have here in the slide towards where we list our features, and also our YouTube channel with recordings from our events. It's a huge knowledge base out there, so a lot of companies and presenters had valuable slides about implementing the various use cases for Kamailio. So YouTube channel is a good resource for learning Kamailio. We also upload our slides to kamailio.org events, so you find there. And I'm going to end this session, what I had prepared upfront, with a few words about the next major Kamailio release, which is going to be numbered version 5.2.0 will be the first in the release series, and then 5.2.1 and so on with patch releases. The target date would be this autumn, so we expect to have around 1 more month of development, so adding a new feature. Then we are going to enter into the testing phase, typically between 1 and 2 months, depending on how testing is going, and then we'll have the release. I summarized the new module that's going to be in this new release. In the first slide was a summary of the last 2 years, more or less. Some of them are part of the next release, so they are developed during the last month. And besides new modules, a lot of features added to the existing modules, as well as extending these embedded interpreters. You could see up Python 3 and up Ruby, which are the interpreters embedded in Kamailio for Python 3 and Ruby language were added during this development cycle, as well as new functions were made available to the CAN. So I expect the next major release in, let's say, 2, maximum 3 months time frame, as we estimate now. Hopefully no other big delay. And yeah, before or at the beginning of the winter, you could play with the new Kamailio in a stable environment. We hope to speed up all this process via an event, or at an event that we just announced to the public today. Of course, there were a couple of days before where we prepared. So we are planning to have Kamailio developers meetings. So several developers will meet in Düsseldorf for 2 days and will work together on some important aspects of Kamailio. Could be code or could be related tools or documentation. This is open for anyone, but we are having a limited space and we'll try to put priority to the existing developers. But if there is space, anyone that wants to hack a bit around Kamailio will be welcome to join. So I'm trying to end up here because we could start the open discussion. Of course, next year we're gonna have the next Kamailio Awards expected on the same time frame, April, May. It's probably gonna take a few weeks until we find the right time frame, because we need to synchronize between a couple of entities that are involved in the organizer of the event. But yeah, we aim for the spring of next year, April, May. And of course, as Josh said, I'll hope to see many of you at the next ClueCon in August in Chicago. So that would be the highlights for Kamailio project. Now I'm ready for having an open discussion. Whatever you want to ask about Kamailio, either about the project or using it with FreeSwitch or other projects.
Well, I've got a question for you from the audience, Daniel. When you were talking about using the scripting languages such as Lua, how is null handled? You know, like when a script exits or aborts early, and what happens with errors in those kind of situations?
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, when I added first, I said, okay, let's use exit from Lua, and when I did it, Kamailio stopped, because, as I said, Lua compiles to C code, and the exit in Lua is actually the calling internally the exit from the libc, which triggers an exit on Kamailio. So that was no solution, because you don't really want to stop Kamailio when you stop the execution of when you want to stop the execution of the routing logic script. And for a couple of months, I said, okay, we'll have to use return. So you return back, and when you return from the main function, which would be the KSR request route, will be the entry point in the Lua script for execution. Then practically you return the execution inside Kamailio, and Kamailio waits for the next message. But felt a bit not in pair with what we had, or not having the same kind of experience with people familiar with Kamailio CFG scripting language. And as I was Googling Stack Overflow and so on, I found an idea that you could write an error in Lua. So practically this KSR, and I can go back into the slide, as I can see it here. I have this example. So now you see this KSR X exit So that would be implemented inside Kamailio, which practically is raising an error in to the Lua interpreter, and that is stopping the execution of the script. But based on the message of the error, I know, okay, it's not really an error, it's actually what I triggered myself. So just to clarify or to say that this KSR.x is a submodule exported by the Kamailio interpreter module, so it's specific for each language. Like Python will have another implementation of KSR.x exit. Is not the same as done for the Lua. So in the C code will be something different. Actually, I did a wrong mistake. I did a mistake here because Python is not implementing the exit. In Python, you can use the exit from the Python language because that's throwing an exception, and then we catch it inside Kamailio, and we know it's an exit from the Python script, not an exit from Kamailio code. So, but for others like JavaScript and Squirrel, it's a specific implementation for each language. I had to search what would be a trick, to call it like that, to have the same behavior as an exit in native Kamailio CFG. So don't use, to summarize it, don't use exit from the Lua language. You have to use KSR.x exit, which is a specific implementation I did to stop execution of the Lua script. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, I think you've answered it quite well there. One of the other things that I saw here, and you kind of brushed over real quick, is you have recently released several IMS-related modules, like diameter, and you have another IMS module coming out soon. Why all the interest in IMS from Kamailio?
So back to the research institute. So in research, practically always there were projects on new technologies. And back in 2005, when I was actually leading the institute, my colleagues started to look into these specifications that were written at that moment actually by the GSMA and the ITU towards IMS, towards use of SIP in the mobile network, because this is IMS. But as we know, in telecom, they like abbreviation, and for each whatever new technology, they need to find some abbreviation that is more or not appropriate to what they want to implement. So practically a subgroup in the institute started on top of the SIP Express router, which was a project at that moment, to write some extension towards implementing the IMS specs. Because again, we had to play there with the edge technology, make test beds, and allow players from the business market and to come and test there, like an interop test bed and like a reference implementation. In 2008, as the project or the sub-project in the institute was released as OpenIMS Core. It was built again on top of SIP Express router version 0.9. We updated it and we made it, we incorporated in Kamailio because we had to update some internal API to make it work. And why is the interest is because, IMS is costing a lot of money if you want to buy it from a well-established vendor. I don't know, probably I can name here all these like Ericsson, Huawei, Nokia. They don't really work with small guys, or when they work, you have to pay a lot of money. So it started probably for people willing to play with IMS, and then people building devices to be IMS compatible. They needed to test with as many implementation as possible. And having open source gives you the flexibility to look into the code, improve if our code was bad or their code was bad. So it was not like, okay, I get this error code, like a response, why it happened. You could look in the source code and say, okay, it's happening because of that. Okay, it's my problem. Oh, it's not my problem. Let's report it. And in this way, we got quite a good implementation out there. As an alternative in the open source space would be from the CallWeaver project, or how it's called, that one, from MetaSwitch, which they have a couple of IMS extensions for free. I don't want to say untrue statements here because I'm not working that much into the IMS extension myself. We have Carsten and a couple of other people. I even see here Carlos, which in the past did a lot of work for the IMS extension in Kamailio, so he joined the session. But I think the other implementation from that was made open source from MetaSwitch is not fully available or full implementation. You need some of the commercial products from that company, like the SBC and so on, to really make it work. So it's a bit like half open source if you really want to deploy it by your own. And now, because of the 5G, where you are supposed to have even going towards 6G, where you can run your own small cell network, open source is cost effective in that space, and at least for the startup phase, it's a good option to use later. If something is missing, you may need to buy from other vendors, because I have to say this is, of course, SIP routing core. You might need what's called the HLR, in the past HSS, which would be the location server, which speaks with diameters. It's an open source alternative from Fraunhofer Institute as well. Implemented in Java. So this, what we have in Kamailio, because we are a SIP router, is the SIP part, and diameter to interact with other elements in the IMS network. But deploying a full IMS platform will require other components which are not related to SIP. Of course, you can even need the EPC, which would be control of the bandwidth. So when a call is made, you have to reserve the bandwidth for the VoIP call. That will be the evolve packet core. But again, the IMS itself is the SIP related part, and it's what we have in Kamailio, and it comes at no cost. Probably if you want to take a test bed from some of the big vendors, I would count on at least 6, if not 7-digit figure for a purchase. So hopefully that's also clarifying.
Yeah, no, that's very clarifying. A lot of people don't realize how much. Yes, there's a lot of other protocols like diameter and some of the other things that are in IMS, but they don't really realize that the core of modern mobile networks, especially when they're using IMS core, is a lot of SIP is involved there. So things like Kamailio come into play quite heavily. Even FreeSwitch has been used as a AS node in IMS networks before. So I mean, I did a lot of patches for it about a decade ago, just to make sure that everything was working in accordance with IMS spec. So you can, so that you can then use that with, in fact, I think I used it with the old open source IMS core that was based on CERN, on Civic Express router, which you probably worked on some. So
yeah, I worked on the project when they started to add IMS extension. Was the time when I left the institute, so back in 2005, quite a long time.
Right. So I've got another question here that somebody passed along to me that they'd like to get your opinion on. Do you have a preference on RTP proxy versus RTP engine? And when do you choose which one of those to use?
So I would say if you start a brand new platform and you look for, WebRTC, proper security, encryption, and so on, then it's only one answer: RTP engine. It was started inside our community or inside the project by the people at Zipwise, and it has been developed quite a lot in the last few years. So it's the first choice. I would go for something future-proof. However, there are some situations when I still deploy RTP proxy, and that's when people need to deploy just a classic telephony system, and they really like using packages from the system because RTP engine is not available on all major distribution out there. They focus a lot on Debian, but there are also people using it on CentOS, so should be fine there. As I said, RTP proxy has this only benefit in terms of being available as a package on the official repository of some distribution, and if the customer would like that, instead of compiling from sources, I'll deploy it. Otherwise, as I said, in terms of capabilities, they are probably infer even more from the RTP engine, and scalability. It's also way better because it's a multi-threading as opposite of a single thread with RTP proxy 1.2. There was some recent work on RTP proxy version 2.0 and maybe 2.1. I haven't really followed. I typically deploy the old one, which is available 1.2 or RTP engine lately. So.
Cool. Thank you, Daniel. And now I've got another question from you for you from Mr. James Bodie on the YouTube chat here. He asked, where are you guys with open source support for SCTP within Kamailio? As you know, SCTP is really needed for IMS networks.
Yeah, for SIP we have SCTP for I think since 2007 or 8 as a protocol. So if you want to do SIP over SCTP, it's available there. I have tested only between Kamailios because end devices you don't find any implementing it, and then there are the home routers, the NAT routers, which cannot route properly SCTP. So for core network should be ready, should be scalable. It was implemented by a big vendor at that time, which was acquired. Meanwhile, I will avoid saying the names, but some people could guess. So it was used in the core network routing for SIP for a huge amount of traffic. What's probably missing would be SCTP for diameter. So SCTP for the protocol that is used in IMS for G networks, voice over LTE. I haven't really looked at it to see what it will take, but I know that some people ask about that. So if you are safe, you can use the SCTP a lot. All the other protocols that we somehow support via various modules, so not in the core, that needs to be evaluated. What it takes to do.
I think they'll get you a good answer there, Mr. Bodie. All right, so we're reaching the top of the hour here, Daniel, and I know it's late in the day there for you. So is there anything you want to get in here before we wrap things up for the day?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably we could do another session to address other, maybe more specific. If you have a community that can say, okay, I would like to hear more about Kamailio and that specific functionality, I'll be glad to join. Otherwise, I think I'm fine for now. I'm looking forward to meet the FreeSwitch team also at Asipto. Just mentioned I had a great ClueCon, by the way, and I cannot complain. And a lot of people know it was the greatest because I went home with a laptop, with the ClueCon logo on it. So it was great from that point of view, but even greater for the people I met there. I had to skip for 1 or 2 years before because of other engagements, but it was a really great event, and it was great to sync again with FreeSwitch and SignalWire guys, larger team there, vibing environment. So I'm looking forward to see what you guys are gonna release in the near future.
It should be really interesting all the way around. And yeah, Daniel, we'll definitely have to get you back on here. We'll find out what people want to hear from you next, and then we'll get with the scheduling people and see if we can't get you back in here before long. And on that note, if you have interesting topics that you want to see guys like Daniel talk about, email us at marketing@cluecon.com. That way we can get in touch with those guys and see if we can't get them in here. Daniel, thank you very much again for coming in and joining us today. It's very informative on where you guys are and where you guys are headed. So, and I know with any open source project, and I'll go ahead and say this, if you guys are interested in Kamailio 5.2, as Daniel and his team are getting those commits in and they start approaching release, please help them test. Go download it, compile it, help them point out stuff. Do that same thing with FreeSwitch. That's where it sounds crazy, but test the pre-release code, because that lets us know where to fix things before it's a release. And there's only so much testing that small open source teams can do themselves. They have a lot of other things that they have to do to make sure that they can work on the open source. And so it's greatly appreciated. So again, Daniel, thank you for joining us today. And we'll see you guys next week.
You've been watching ClueCon Weekly. Tune in every Wednesday at 12 p.m. Central. Keep up with the latest happenings by subscribing to our YouTube channel, follow us on Facebook and Twitter, or visit us at freeswitch.com.
And we're clear. Daniel, thank you very much again for joining us today. It's always good to have you guys on here.
Thanks, Ken. I'm happy to join as often as